Hello, welcome again to Steve's Vintage Model Builds. Thanks for joining me. And today, as promised in a previous video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Middle East. Merry Christmas, everybody, to start with, and Happy Hanukkah. Excuse me. Both fast approaching, as I mentioned before. Hanukkah also begins on December 25th. Excuse me. Also known as the Festival of Lights. Anybody who's interested, they can go look up the history of that. It is based on an actual event, or, well, yeah, we'll just leave it at that. So basically, you know, a lot of people are familiar with the menorah. That's the candelabra that you commonly see. And excuse me. The story goes that during one of the Jewish uprisings, I think it was the Bar Kokhba, but it might have been a previous one. There were a few where the Jews rose up against the European occupiers, the Romans, and the second time. The Romans destroyed the temple, of which the Western Wall still exists, and renamed the Kingdom of Israel, Syria Palestina, which is where we get Palestine from now. So it's an entirely construct. Palestine is a construct of European occupiers. So there you go. Before it was the Kingdom of Israel, it was the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, and actually spanned an area, excuse me, and, you know, 1,000 or more years before the Roman occupation, spanned an area that went well up into Lebanon, Syria, and down into Saudi Arabia. And again, this was well more than 1,000 years before a single Arab set foot in what is now Israel. So enough of that for now. Anybody who tells you any different is just wrong. So anyways, yeah, so lots of stuff going on. I'll start with Israel and Gaza. First of all, Israel has transferred a number of military units from Lebanon. Things seem to be fairly quiet there after the Hezbollah were pretty much obliterated. So they've transferred units down to Gaza to clean things up. They're still finding large tunnels, which they're dealing with. And the last stronghold, which was the refugee camp of Jabalia, I object to the term camp. They're not camps. They're cities. They're cities and towns, just like regular cities and towns. They're not camps. In camps, people live in tents, in temporary structures. And the only reason people are living in tents now is because of the Hamas and radical Islamic aggressions. Okay, so for all intents and purposes now, Hamas has been defeated. There are whatever senior leadership they still have left. The people on the ground aren't really able to communicate with them. Communication is slow, and there's no command and control. And pretty much, they're reduced to, just, minor attacks, excuse me, against Israeli forces. But they've been completely removed as a political force, and they're also pretty much non-existent as a military force. So, although I suppose technically they still exist as an organization, and I guess their leadership, Left Gutter, has told it's supposed to be pronounced. It's appropriate. And they're now in Turkey. So here we go. You know, we've been talking about, you know, we've heard all about the Iranian octopus. Iran is the head, and all the proxy tentacles. As we know, Hezbollah has been, if not eradicated, then certainly quelled to the point where they're not able to operate. And, you know, whatever the ceasefire is more or less holding after a bit of a rough start. Again, probably because they have very little capability left. The Israelis, when they invaded Lebanon and went after the Hezbollah proper, they recovered so many anti-tank weapons that Israel is seriously considering forming one or two specialized units to be equipped by that equipment. So it's a lot. Anti-tank, you know, mostly anti-tank missiles, rocket launchers, that kind of thing. So on to Syria. Excuse me. As I mentioned in the previous video, Israel has moved into the buffer zone. Some would call it a demilitarized zone, but it's not anymore because Israel's there. They moved into the buffer zone, northern part of the Golan Heights, Mount Hebron, and they've even moved further into Syria. A lot of people are kind of upset about that. Well, too bad. Just like in Lebanon, the UN forces there didn't do their job. Well, they did initially, back in the 70s and early 80s. But you know, they just abandoned the place. There were no UN troops there at all. There was no UN presence at all. So that left a vacuum, which was rightly filled by Israel. A lot of people squawking about that, including the new Syrian guy, whoever, you know, terrorist who still has a bounty on his head, and a lot of blood on his hands. Wants them out. Well, sorry, they're staying. And they're going to stay as long as they feel they need to in order to protect the security of northern and eastern Israel. As for being upset about a foreign nation occupying part of their land, maybe they should look northward to Turkey, which is, as we speak, amassing huge numbers of troops on the northern border, and they also have effective military control of much of northern Syria already. Erdogan wants to reestablish the Ottoman Empire, and of course that includes Syria, Israel, Lebanon, the whole Levant, Jordan. It's problematic because Turkey's a NATO member, and again, as I mentioned in a previous video, there's no mechanism for NATO to expel a member. So that's going to make things awkward, but there are other ways that they can deal with Turkey. You know, they can stop any kind of information sharing, weapons, and so on and so forth going there. As I mentioned again in the previous video, Turkey, after begging for upgrades to their F-16 fleet, has decided to go with Russian and Chinese aircraft. They're welcome to them. Just as previously, instead of buying U.S. air defense systems, they went with the S-400 systems, which we saw in Iran are virtually useless, and we see too in Ukraine. They're virtually useless. Whatever countermeasures they have are easily overcome. So the problem now, the problem child, So, this is what happens, and again, going back to the previous video, this is what happens um, uh, when foreign policy is left pretty much rudderless, and what rudder there was in the United States was guiding them in the wrong directions. However, all that's going to change on January 20th, and I continue to say, and will continue to say, the world will be a better place with Donald J. Trump as president. As far as China is concerned in the region, I wouldn't worry too much about China. They basically want a world that's left over. They want to have a world left that they can take over. So I think they're just going to pretty much keep their hands off. Again, I think the key here is going to be strengthening Jordan and renewing the Abraham Accords, particularly with Saudi Arabia. Speaking of Saudi Arabia, a Saudi doctor drove into a crowd at a Christmas market in Germany, and the government and the media and the elites, regular German folks are really upset, just as British folks are, for the same reason, and they're marching in protest, and their banners read "Remigration," and it's not unique to Germany. And in case you can't figure it out, it means send them back where they came from, and no more new migration, which was really an invasion all around the world, in various different countries, and it's going to take a while to deal with that. Again, there was news today, a Guatemalan migrant in New York City set fire to a woman on the New York City subway, and stood there and watched as she burned to death. So, you want to call people far right? Call them far right. I don't care. Okay? I'm far right. Call me far right. I'm not far right. Alright? I know what I am. I'm a moderate who's pretty upset, along with lots of other regular folks. Alright? So, if you want to smear people by calling them far right and bringing up the fascist boogeyman or whatever you want to do, which is what's going on in Germany with the elites. They're labeling the protesters as far right, and everything's fine, nothing to see here, don't worry. Well, they're not only out of touch, but I think they're going to go down too before too long, as we've seen in the United States. And it looks finally like Trudeau is going to be gone in Canada. I'm not going to go into all that because it's nauseating. And at this point, he really only has. He's going to face again the NDP leader Singh, who propped him up for all these months and years since the last election, when Trudeau got an even further reduced minority. Singh has said that he's going to introduce a non-confidence motion. Singh has said before he's not going to support him, but continued to, so I'll believe that when I see it. The Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, is preparing his own non-confidence motion. So the government will fall. At least 15 Liberal Party members. He shuffled his cabinet after his Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, resigned in a scathing letter. But she smells Liberal leadership bid, and she's been totally complicit with Trudeau in plunging Canada into the worst debt ever. Canada's a small country, only about 40 million people, and they've doubled the debt to $1.2 trillion. And this fall's economic statement, which Freeland resigned immediately before she was supposed to deliver, was tacking on another $62 billion. Initially, when Trudeau won a huge majority in 2015, he said that the government would run modest deficits for the first 2 years, and then the budget would be balanced. Well, that didn't happen. The deficits weren't modest. They weren't in the 30, 50, 60 million. They were in the billions. And so now that's where Canada's at today. And it's going to take a lot of hard decisions, and there's going to be a lot of consternation and a lot of upset people. But this is what happens when things are let go too long. And so hopefully, so yeah, if he loses the non-confidence motion, then automatically the government falls. And of course there'll be a Liberal leadership review. All the polls are pointing to a massive Conservative majority, and but you never know what's going to happen. But Canadians are very upset, and Liberal support is completely crumbled, except for the hardest of the hardcore Liberal cuckoos, who are complete thralls to Trudeau's cult of personality. And I don't use that term lightly either. Excuse me. So, if the government falls, in the meantime, he can resign. He can resign as Prime Minister, and then there would be a leadership bid, and probably the government would fall as well, one way or another, through non-confidence motion, or have some sort of financial bill voted down. But he does have one other option, which is a rather nuclear option, which is called proroguing of Parliament. And basically he would go to the Governor-General, who's a Liberal lapdog, and owes her job to him. And he would go and say, I want you to prorogue Parliament, which means Parliament's not in recess, Parliament isn't dismissed, there's no election. It just means everybody goes home, keeps getting paid, and none of the business of the nation gets done until little Lord Trudeau decides to unprorogue Parliament. That's our system. I've always been a pretty staunch supporter of the monarchy, especially under Queen Elizabeth, but lately they're showing themselves to be the same kind of global elitists that we see in the WEF and elsewhere. They do still do some really good work, but not interested in becoming the 51st state. But I think it's time for Canada to seriously consider a different structure of our government. But that's a whole different ballgame. If you don't know how Canada works or doesn't work, there's a French ethnic nationalist province called Quebec. They've driven out most of their English-speaking people. They run their own immigration. They never signed on to the Constitution. They have their own pension plan, etc., etc., etc. But they still take billions mostly from our oil and gas-rich province of Alberta in transfer payments, or equalization payments, I should say. Canada has a system where wealthier provinces give money to the federal government to equalize the poorer provinces, which is a good thing, and it's part of Canada's social contract, because we're all Canadians and we all should enjoy the benefits and promise of our great nation. But anyways, they're not interested in being part of Canada. All they want is their ethnic nationalist progressive paradise, and which, everywhere else in the world, ethnic nationalist governments are considered to be bad, but for some reason they get away with it. Well, I could make a year's worth of videos explaining that, but I'm not even going to try. So enough about that. So we're all hoping that one way or another Trudeau will be gone. If he has any shred of honor, which I don't believe, he will, like his father did decades ago, take a walk in the snow and decide that it's time for him to go. Beyond his megalomaniac ego, I think the main reason he clings to power is because he and his government ministers have been the most corrupt in Canadian history, and that's saying something. I mean, we've had our problems with corruption too. Usually, back in the 19th century, most of it occurred. Excuse me. So, yeah, he's terrified that when all the books are opened up, they've withheld all sorts of information that should be public, and we know why. Because they're a bunch of criminal gangsters, simple as that. Right from the get-go, right from day one. There was the Wee scandal. If anybody remembers Wee, remember Wee? They were Trudeau's the Clunkerberger brothers or whatever they are. The government, Trudeau's government, they were buddies of Trudeau's, of course, and the government awarded them millions of dollars in contracts to do various things. And they promptly used a lot of that money to pay his mother, Margaret, and his brother, Alexander, I think his name is. They have a penchant in that family for naming their children after emperors. Started with his father, Pierre, named his sons Justin and Alexander, and Trudeau's sons are Hadrian, of all things, and I don't know what the other one is. Anyways, it doesn't matter. So, anyways, nobody likes him anymore. It's worse than Kamala because he's in power. Nobody likes him anymore. Even his wife left him, and but he's a feminist. He's a feminist who never misses an opportunity to throw one of his female ministers under the bus, as he did with Chrystia Freeland and as he did with I can't remember her name now. It was Jody something. She was also a First Nations person. So it's all just BS from him. So yeah, he's the worst of DEI, and like I say, he never when it suits his purpose, he's never hesitated to throw his female ministers under the bus. So if he tries to tell you he's a feminist, then yeah, just don't believe it. He's a liar. I'm not in Parliament, so I can call him a liar. And he's a purveyor of falsehoods, if you want to put it that way. And so anyway, so that's it. Back to the Middle East. So yeah, so problems there with Turkey. Sorry about that. Esther just got back from shopping, and so had a little interruption there. Okay, so where was I? Oh, okay, yeah. The head of the octopus and the octopus. So most of the octopus's tentacles have been lopped off. Hamas is done. The Hezis are pretty much done. And it's now the Houthis' turn. There was a very strange incident where an F-18, a U.S. F-18 down in the Red Sea, was shot down. The U.S. says it was friendly fire. The Houthis say they did it. I doubt that. But it's very strange. The pilot and navigation control officer ejected successfully, and one did have minor injuries, but they were safely recovered, and yeah. So I guess they're being debriefed and figure out what's going on. But even though things are getting better, how do you know? I mean, like I understand friendly fire. Okay, I mean, when you're in the heat of battle and you send in some artillery ordnance and it lands in the wrong place, or it lands where you thought bad guys were, but they weren't bad guys, or if you're simply in a firefight and you happen to shoot the wrong people. But friendly fire on an F-18 from another U.S. ship. DEI. That's the only thing I can think. Anyways, some sort of gross incompetence. As I said, mistakes happen in active combat. I doubt very much that the Houthis. I don't. They can send missiles and drones, but they can't shoot down an F-18. They just can't. And speaking of them, they're the last ones left, and both Israel and the United States have started to pound them into the sand, which is where they belong. And it's unfortunate if some civilians get hurt, but they brought it on themselves. So that's the last tentacle. It's not even a tentacle. It's like a little sucker at this point. And they talk a big game, but yeah. Now we come to Iran, which is falling apart. They've had to close most of their gas stations. The real, their currency, bottomed out, I think, yesterday or whatever, at over 7,000 to the U.S. dollar. It makes the yen look like, even the ruble. So, anyways, the banks have closed. A lot of the banks have been closed. The financial system is collapsing. With the fall of Syria, they lost a huge investment, and Assad ran off with a lot of money they had given them. And so there's protests. Workers have been furloughed because there isn't enough power to run the businesses and so on and so forth. Civil servants and etc. So they're sitting around at home twiddling their thumbs, but not for long. They're going to start protesting and be upset. Of course, Iran blames it on Israel. They said, "Oh, the attack in February, blah 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 blah." Well, up until quite recently, they had maintained that there was very little damage and nothing really happened, and so on and so forth. So my hope is that the regime will simply collapse. And the Revolutionary Guard and the Quds Force, they're at each other's throats, and they're losing their grip on power. So the collapse has begun, and hopefully there won't have to be excessive military intervention. But their nuclear program still remains, and that has to be dealt with, no question about it. All right. Blinken, the idiot, said last week at one point there was still a chance for another Iran deal. No, there isn't. Okay, and I don't know why he even keeps talking. I guess because that's his job. And and of course, on the U.S. side, speaking of things collapsing, more and more is coming about how Joe was missing in action. President. What do you call it? Can't think of the word right now. Figurehead. Figurehead president. And the news is coming out now that nobody could really have access to him. He had, I think, throughout his entire presidency, he only had 12 full cabinet meetings, and anybody who wanted to talk to him had to go through layers and layers and layers of handlers, and most people didn't get a chance to talk to him. So I think, and that's a big reason we're in the mess we're in today, because the United States didn't really have a president, and the State Department was probably running things mostly, and the Department of Justice, or under Garland, the Department of Injustice. And so, anyways, a bit of a Mish-mash today. Mish-mash. Oh, and what's her name? Fanny there in Georgia that brought all those charges, and then had her boyfriend prosecuted. He got disqualified. Now she's been disqualified, and the judge really spanked her and said, you know, you should have stopped this long ago. And anyways, so. And again, getting back to the horrific incident with the Guatemalan migrant, just a few hours later, the governor, what's her name, Hochul, she came out and said, you know, you got to wonder about these people. She came out and said, you know, how safe New York is and the subway system. Meanwhile, she's deployed the National Guard to guard the subway system. So there you go. All right, so yeah, so Iran's collapsing, and hopefully there'll be just minimal military intervention required there. But their nuclear program will have to be destroyed that way. There will be no dismantling of the program under the auspices of the UN or the IAEA, whatever it is. The IAEA, yeah. Israel won't go for that, you know, and President Trump will have their back, and also he will help. Yeah, so there you go. And people who say, oh, they're under mountains, and they're this, and they're that, and they're the other thing. Well, yes, that may be the case. And you may not be able to level those mountains and get deep down, even with the biggest bunker buster bombs. But you can render those places inaccessible, shall we say, and uninhabitable for humans, one way or another. Okay, so that's it for today. Just kind of a short one, just over 30 minutes. And lost a few subscribers, as I mentioned, maybe because of some of my opinions on videos like these, or maybe people just got bored, or just year-end cleanup of their subscriptions, whatever the case might be. But I've also gained some back, so I'm at 529 now. So, woohoo! And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do a bunch of kit reviews around this time of year, which last year gained me a lot of subscribers. But the new year will come, and I'm going to have some very fun and interesting things to go over. Okay, so yeah, and oh yes, and I posted the rant, the excoriation on the disastrous airline that we flew to and from Japan, and you know, they sent me a feedback form. How was your experience with us? Well, I sure let them have it, just like I did in the video. So I do my best to be I'm a fair person, and I bend over backwards to not criticize. But this just sent me right over the edge. And again, being a fair person when situations are just so egregious, you know. So, anyways, the best I could say is on the flight out, we left and arrived on time, and on both flights, the cabin crew were pleasant. Otherwise, nothing good to say whatsoever. So, yeah, so check out that video if you haven't already. Thanks to everybody who watches. Thanks, Betty, at pre-retirement days. Oh, and I should mention, he doesn't need it, but I'm going to say so anyways, along with TV7 and ILTV, Israeli TV channels. TV7 in particular is led by Jonathan Hessen, who's a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute in the United States. Brilliant man. And he assembles a great crew of people who analyze what's going on over there. Also Meyer Tusi. Meyer Tusi, if you haven't heard of him, that's Mayhertusi. Meyer Tusi does all sorts of great videos. He's Iranian and a former Muslim. I think he's Christian now. I think he converted to Christianity, although I might be wrong about that. And he has a non-Muslim British girlfriend, very lovely young lady. He's a handsome devil too. Don't get me wrong, I'm all guy. But anyways, yeah, it's a good-looking guy. The Iranian people are, they're good-looking people. The women are gorgeous, and for the most part, and men are handsome. But in any case, enough about that. So yeah, check out Meyer Tusi, and right now he has a 50% off sale on his Tusi TV Plus. I don't know how much it normally costs. I don't know what it costs now. But he does some great analysis. He does live chats, his father's still in Iran, and he still has great contacts in Iran. So he's right on what's going on there. And actually, he was invited by the British police to go in for a talk, which was basically just an intimidation because they don't like what he's saying. And he's totally against the mainstream media, and you get stuff from him that you won't hear from BBC, Sky News, or whatever else you get over there, which I guess for the most part the British people are pretty much rejecting anyways. It's ridiculous. Anyways, yeah, hopefully, not hopefully, definitely a lot of things are going to change under President Trump, and the world is going to see what real American leadership is capable of and how it truly benefits the world. And I think you'll find that the people who cry the loudest about it are the people who are the least inclined to support democracy and freedom and human rights for all, not just for some. And a lot of that starts with Israel. All right, so you don't have to like Israel's policies. You don't have to like some of their actions, but they've been put in a very difficult position, and they are certainly fighting for their lives, and which they deserve to have, just as any other human being does. And a lot of people might not believe this, but having to do what they've had to do, particularly in Gaza, has been very wounding to them, morally and spiritually. They don't listen to the narrative that they're bloodthirsty, horrible people who, all they want to do is conquer and blah, blah. No, they don't. All right, they just want to live in peace and security, like everybody else in the world should. All right. Unfortunately, there's massive areas of that region in particular that aren't interested in that kind of thing. They're only interested in death and destruction, particularly of the Jewish state and the Jewish people. So there's no justification for the rabid anti-Semitism that we see, and excuse me. And as many have said before, including Benjamin Netanyahu's father, along with a lot of other people, is that anti-Semitism and Jew hatred is the canary in the coal mine, and it leads, if it's unchecked, to a breakdown in civilization, as we saw in Nazi Germany in the 1930s and through the Second World War, and which is actually, just a continuation. It's been continued by many of the local Arabs, beginning with the Mufti of Jerusalem, who was a good buddy of Hitler's, and had a lot to do with instilling um, Hitler's insane hatred of Jewish people. It was already there, but in any case, enough of that. So we're all human beings. We all deserve to live as free human beings in peace and security. And there's just no way to justify, well, they did this or they do that or whatever. No. The fact of the matter is, if Israel and the Israelis had just been left alone to live in their land, which also includes 2.2 million Israeli Arabs who enjoy full participation in the society, the economy, and the politics. So, all this business about occupiers and so on and so forth, well, no. I'm not going to go into the whole big history, but they just need to get over it. And the biggest crime of all is what Arab leaders since the 1930s and 40s have simply used the poor fellaheen, the regular folks. And it's going to take a long time to bring those people around to a civilized way of thinking, and not sending their children out to stab and blow themselves up and throw rocks and so on and so forth. Last little thing, UNRWA. Sweden withdrew all of its funding to UNRWA. I expect it's one of the first things that President Trump will do when he assumes office, as he did the first time he assumed office, and just as with the Iran nuclear payoff, Biden restored it. So we're going to see a lot of changes, a lot of good changes. It's going to be some rough times, but we're going to be on the right trajectory. And Mr. Trump's got a lot to do in 4 years, and he's already getting busy with it. So if you don't like it, get over it. Go live somewhere else. And if you want to be an enemy of the USA, fine, go ahead, be an enemy of the USA, and see where that gets you. Usually 6 feet under, if not in little pieces, splattered against some wall somewhere. Hope that doesn't get me into trouble with YouTube. Anyway, so so that's it for today, and it's the day before Christmas. So Merry Christmas to everyone, and peace on earth and goodwill to all people. That's the promise of Christianity, and it's also the promise of Western civilization and much of our civilization that's based on Judeo-Christian values and Jewish laws. So okay, so that's it for today, and I'm going to take a break over Christmas. I don't expect to be doing anything, and as I mentioned, unfortunately my phone's gone all wonky, and I've had a terrible time making videos. So what I'm going to try and do when I get home is I do have one truncated one of the visit to Tamiya headquarters, and another one to follow up. And but I think what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to end up doing like a PowerPoint slideshow of the trip and so on and so forth. So, all right. So love each other, and most importantly, love yourself. Respect yourself. Whenever you're faced with some sort of difficult or moral decision, ask yourself the question: am I better than this? I should try to be better than this. All right. So, as Robert De Niro said in I think it was A Bronx Tale. No big fan of his, but his character told his son a great piece of advice. Think with the big head, not the little head. All right. So, those are words of wisdom. So yeah, think with your head, think with your heart, and if you find yourself anger rising in yourself, take a step back and say, hey, wait a second, is this really justified? Is it necessary? So that's it. Peace on earth, goodwill to all, and thanks for joining me. And I hope everyone has a safe and blessed Christmas season, Hanukkah, and if there's any other people out there doing any other kind of celebrating, and if shopping's your religion, again, do it safely and try not to blow your budget. Remember, you're responsible for yourself, no one else. Okay. All right. Among the many lessons my father told me was, this life owes you nothing. All right? You owe it to yourself, you owe it to your family, and you owe it to the community to be the best person you can be. There you go. And the other piece of advice that I've quoted many times is, the world is full of jerks. Do your very best not to be one. All right, so thanks again for joining me, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll be seeing you after Christmas. Bye now.